Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. Today I am just talking about the books that I've read this week, and I think in a sort of moment of post-Booker fatigue, I think many of these books are pretty short, and that I think has been very much what my brain has needed. I've been very sleepy, so here is me talking a bit about some of those books, and yeah, it started really with some quite exciting books that were all quite a little bit more unusual in some ways. The kind of the joy of sort of small presses and sort of small books is often they're these little experimental things that you don't really expect. And the first of these is Kate Bush themed, and this is Paul Becker with How We Made the Kick Inside. The Kick Inside being Kate Bush's first album, and this is just such a beautiful little gem of a book. And I have to admit, I picked it up only really because of the Kate Bush aspect of it, and because it's a small press and thought it sounded kind of cool and exciting. And sort of Joan Publishing is the sort of little kind of sort of group who kind of had published it. And what actually this is so entirely different. So on paper, this book starts to sort of sound like it is a genuine conversation between Kate Bush and the producers of The Kick Inside. And so you sort of expect this sort of artistic journey that is them talking about, you know, how the album was put together and all those sorts of things, which I thought sounded interesting. And it was a little book, so I thought I'd give it a go. But actually, this book right at the beginning tells you that it's all fictional. And what this really is sort of more of an exploration of what it means to create art, what art really is, but also just a sort of really fantastical kind of story. So essentially, the first half is sort of this almost interview style format of, you know, on one side of the page, it'll sort of say, you know, KB for Kate Bush, and you have AP, the sort of name of the producer, Andrew Powell. But then halfway through the book, it kind of takes this sort of shift where we no longer really are talking about this album, but instead there's a sort of incident that happens to Kate Bush where she's sort of trapped inside this sort of structure that sort of collapsed. And in that process, she sort of really tries to sort of look at what's happening in her world and in her life, and sort of tries to make sense of it. And it's just a really quite captivating book, and I really didn't know what to expect from this, but really enjoyed this. This is sort of just a thought experiment almost of playing around with these ideas. And I mean, even with the Kate Bush thing aside, you know, being as it is that I love her, this book I think just really worked as a sort of a really interesting exploration. It's only about 60 or 70 pages as well, so really, really interesting. Keeping up with a sort of slightly experimental theme, or sort of slightly off the beaten path, I read All My Teachers Died of AIDS by Sam Moore. And this is, again, like a teeny tiny little almost pamphlet. And this is essentially Sam Moore kind of exploring what his sort of childhood was like in terms of kind of the queer icons or kind of teachers around him in the community, you know, who was around to be able to show him how to be and how to belong in the world, and actually kind of then threading into that obviously the HIV and AIDS crisis and sort of what that looked like. And I just thought this sounded so interesting, and it kind of is just a really interesting, beautiful book because it sort of threads together this sort of personal history with the sort of national history of what was going on around HIV and AIDS, and then sort of an international thing of what was actually happening, and it sort of is told almost in sort of like prose almost. So, yeah, I just really enjoyed this. I thought it was so interesting, and I think another really timely and useful reminder that, you know, in the midst of various pandemics or kind of crises, there are always people there trying to help, but also there are people who come out the other side of it changed, often for the worse, in terms of having to have battled to be themselves, or to find safety and security in those times. So really interesting book, very slim again, because my brain would not let me do much else. Keeping it you know, sufficiently slim as a book and also kind of queer and about death, I read Rotten Days in Late Summer by Ralf Webb, which is a collection of poems, but principally as well sort of has sort of three main sort of bigger poems in this. And this deals a lot with grief, and particularly the sort of death of his father. But we also see sort of a lot about how sort of family relationships intersect around finding identity. There are sort of a series of love poems that are addressed to men and women. There are sort of various bits of sort of trying to work out this sort of strange relationship that can happen between queer people and their parents, of your father is dying but also you're not really sharing your full self with him while all this is happening. There's still something you're holding back in the midst of all of this. So really, really beautiful and interesting book that I read as part of the Polari long list. They've now announced their shortlist, which this didn't make, but really, really excited about some of the other books on that shortlist as well. And I'll be reading those. But yeah, really really lovely to just read some more poetry. I've been I'm always sort of on and off with it, in terms of I'll sort of read loads of it all at once and then I might not touch it for a bit and then come back. So really nice to get back on that horse, particularly post Booker. So yeah, really, really enjoyed this. Next up, I read a book by one of BookTube's very own, Marc Nash, and this was Time After Time, and this sort of largely deals with a sort of apocalyptic or kind of future society where gender roles are somewhat reversed and there's a sort of matriarchy, I guess, but also within that there is sort of some aspect of time travel, and we sort of watch as sort of characters try to explore different timelines and sort of work out how to change society back in some way, or change it. I mean, I've read another book of Marc Nash's before, which I did as a buddy read with Zena over at Beating Around the Books, and I also did a buddy read of this one with her and with Fraser Simons over at Springboard Thought, which was lovely. And even though I was not the best buddy read partner, because I sort of didn't read it for ages and then just finished it in a day, so did not do it right. But I thought this book was so interesting. It has sort of Marc Nash's sort of trademark joyful playing around with language, which I really loved. There's sort of a real, like, sort of tangible fun quality to the way he writes, where you can hear him almost constructing little puns and sort of verbal sort of linguistic jokes as you go, but then also other things that kind of tie back with sort of quite convoluted bits of plot or with whatever else. And so it sort of builds, it sort of surprises you by how much it's building in the background without you noticing, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, just really fun to do another buddy read and to read a book by somebody else on BookTube as well. So all good fun. And then, because I couldn't stay away from a book prize for too long, I read Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino. And this is a book that basically looks at, this is sort of shortlisted for the Wainwright Prize, and it looks at various bits of food or kind of crops or whatever else that are either going extinct or at risk of going extinct, or have gone extinct, and sort of draws a line between sort of our understanding of place and identity and belonging and the food that certain areas grow. So actually, if a certain type of food disappears, that doesn't at first sound like the biggest thing in the world. We've got plenty of other things, but actually that there's a real sense of loss that comes with that, not only sort of culturally, but also in terms of agriculture and whatever else, that actually we lose the sort of diversity of species of various plants or fruits or whatever, you know, that actually also would create issues down the line. So, for example, he talks at one point about how the majority of the world's bananas, like the vast majority, are pretty much all from the same few species of banana. And that doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world at first, but actually it means that if a disease sort of starts to attack a certain type of banana, that actually wipes out most of the world's bananas almost overnight, whereas actually the way they have sort of grown as a species has often been in a way that's actually quite protective, and means that they are you know, it's almost like an insurance sort of policy. If there's a specific type of bug or whatever that will affect one type of banana, the others that will survive. I've been speaking a lot about bananas. This book talks about much more, but I thought it was so interesting in how it sort of really talks about food and place and sort of biodiversity all being connected, and actually how much we lose sort of culturally and societally if we just narrow it down to just this one type of thing. So really, really interesting book of something I completely would not have thought about, actually. So found really interesting. And on a similar note, also part of the Wainwright Prize shortlists, On Gallows Down by Nicola, which specifically looks at an area, the Gallows Down, that is around, that was sort of a site of protest, particularly around sort of environmental protest, and how people have sort of over time tried to continue to protect that area because of its sort of cultural and historical importance, but also the environmental importance. But what I think this book does really, really well as well is to also explain how there's a sense of belonging and place with sort of local areas, that it's much more than just, oh, that's a green, that's sort of just always been there, whatever. Actually, these become sites that we build local legends around, or local stories around. People remember things based in that area, and actually to keep changing it or to destroy an area does much more than just sort of remove it. We lose the memories, we lose things that are associated with it, and we sort of culturally there's something that's gone. And so I think this book does a really great job at articulating that, about kind of looking at what we lose when we sort of just destroy areas of nature or whatever. Anyway, that and the other books, I'm sort of continuing reading the Wainwright Prize. I've just got a few more to finish from the 2 shortlists, but I've been really loving that, as I did last year. I love nature writing anyway, and these books are exquisite, I think. So really, really fun to read them, and I'll be talking a bit more about them soon. Obviously, we're about to go more into Booker season. We're about to have the shortlist soon, so lots coming up with that. But there'll be some other prizes coming in soon that I'll be talking about, so there we go. Anyway, I've been Bob the Booker. I hope you've had a wonderful reading week. Take care, and I will speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.